I want to talk about the AWP litigation, or average wholesale price litigation, a little bit. It's a very complicated area, and there are lots of cases, somewhat different plaintiffs, some different defendants even. But basically, and I'm going to talk in general terms, basically I'm going to take in the context of a state Medicaid agency or Medicaid program suing manufacturers. Let's see, which way do I go?
Green?
Green? Excellent.
He's an Aggie. He needs help on things like
Well, you know, we all need help every once in a
I
while.
taught at A&M for a while, you know, so I've learned how to deal with this. And I've oftentimes said that if you can teach Aggies, you can teach judges. I've been waiting for that line for years.
And we'll all meet Henry outside. But in the meantime, what is AWP? What is average wholesale price? It's a figure that's published in a national compendia that publish that AWP for basically every drug. Maybe not every drug, but almost every drug. There's another price figure, WAC, wholesale acquisition cost, that's also published in compendia. And I'm going to talk about these as only 6. I promised to only give you 6. There are probably hundreds of little price figures I could give you for pharmaceutical markets, but just thinking about AWP and WAC as compendia prices, these are really maximums. These are not discounted. These don't include any kind of rebate. They're the maximum price under which transactions would fall. So if you think of AWP as an umbrella and WAC as an umbrella, AWP relating to the point in the distribution chain where the wholesaler is selling out, and WAC, wholesale acquisition cost, relating to where the wholesaler is buying. These are going to be undiscounted figures. They're going to be the top, an upper bound on where transaction prices are going to fall. Are there, well, basically the allegation is that those numbers have been inflated or manipulated so that reimbursements made by Medicaid agencies and other third-party payers are too high, that they've caused manufacturers by, let's say, manipulating these numbers, have caused over-reimbursement. Now, are there averages of actual manufacturer sales prices out there? There are. There's 2 I'm going to talk about. This is my 3rd and 4th price figure. AMP, and ASP. The average manufacturer price and the average sales price. These are calculated under direction from the government. There are formulas for them, what should be included and not included, which classes of trade they relate to, which discounts and rebates should be put into the calculation, and they're reported back to the Department of Health and Human Services Center for Medicaid and Medicare. The AMP number has been calculated and reported since 1991. It's used as part of the Medicaid rebates. That AMP figure is sent to CMS, and then they use it to calculate rebates, and it relates to Medicaid. The ASP figure comes from manufacturers since about 2005, and it's used in the Medicare program. 2 more price figures, and this also relates to reimbursement, and they're both max. They're maximum allowable costs. When a state program reimburses for a claim on a drug, they're going to set an upper bound on what they're going to pay. The pharmacist will submit a claim, and they'll put their usual and customary charge on there. And the state will pay the usual and customary charge as long as it doesn't exceed their upper bound. And their upper bound is typically based on AWP, sometimes on WAC. And they call it their EAC, their estimated acquisition cost. It's 7, sorry, 1 more. So this upper bound, as long as it's not exceeded, you'll pay the UNC. There's another upper bound for multi-source drugs, and it's called the MAC, the maximum allowable cost. If it's a federal maximum allowable cost, it's called a full. So we've got the AWP and the WAC. Down here we've got the ASP and the AMP. And in the middle, we're going to have the MAC and the fulls. And these set a lower upper bound on what a pharmacy can be reimbursed for. I know it's hopelessly complicated, but that's all I'm going to say on that so far. So what is the claim about? The claim is about these top numbers being manipulated in a way that causes the Medicaid agency to over-reimburse. So when they set their upper bound at AWP minus 10 or WAC plus 9, They think they're paying too much because they say the AWP isn't truthful, it isn't genuine, it isn't reflective of actual sales prices. In fact, they say if you had given us the AMP or the ASP as the AWP, if you'd given us those actual prices, our reimbursements would have been a lot lower. And you owe us, basically, that difference. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of the economic questions surrounding that sort of a claim and the issues that it raises. To start with, let's think about branded self-administered drugs. If it's a branded self-administered drug, then the Medicaid beneficiary went to see a physician, got a prescription, then went to the pharmacy, got the prescription filled, took the prescription home, and administered it themselves. The Medicaid participating pharmacy sent in the claim and got reimbursed. Now, an important thing to keep in mind about the claim is that the over-reimbursement doesn't go to the manufacturer. The over-reimbursement, if there is one, goes to the pharmacy. So the manufacturer doesn't benefit directly. The only way they could have benefited, and plaintiffs will allege they benefit by being able to market that differential and increase their sales. They're going to be able to persuade people to buy their drug versus another because of this inflated or manipulated AWP. But for self-administered pharmacy dispensed drugs, the choice is the physician's. He or she picks what drug will be administered. The pharmacy gets the reimbursement. So there's really an economic disconnect on how a scheme like that would actually work. It doesn't make a lot of sense to talk about it in terms of self-administered branded drugs. But suppose you're talking about a multi-source drug, not a single-source drug now, but one that's subject to those max and those fulls, those lower bounds. Well, now there are multiple drugs that could be chosen by the pharmacy to fill that prescription. There's a choice of generic manufacturers from whom to buy. And there you could say, well, now maybe if you manipulated the AWP or to change the reimbursement level, maybe you could get a competitive advantage that way. But the problem is those max and fulls are common levels of reimbursement for everybody. If I change that level of reimbursement for my drug, and I'm a manufacturer, then I've changed it for everybody's. If the reimbursement for my drug went up by $1, it went up by $1 for everybody. I don't get a competitive advantage out of changing that. What about a physician-administered branded drug? Well, now the decision is in the hands of a physician who actually gets the reimbursement. So there, these issues wouldn't apply. But you can see it's complicated, and you have to think about the incentives. I want to change a little bit and talk about the incentives of the payers. If there are difficulties about why these drugs are being reimbursed the way they are, and it's not necessarily because, I'm going to talk a little bit about market information, it's not because maybe they were deceived, and it's not because there was an intent to deceive anyone about what the AWPs were and what they meant or didn't mean. Why would Medicaid agencies pay more than literal acquisition costs, or in this case even the costs for a wholesaler, the manufacturer's selling out price? Why would they pay more? They might pay more because they want access. Medicaid is in fact, they're, I think, required to provide access. Medicaid, like any insurer, wants to have people in its network. We can all think about how willing we would be to participate in a system that was going to pay us exactly our cost and no more. And maybe an average of costs out there, which means we might lose. That may not be that attractive. So Medicaid agencies may have to go out and figure how much do they have to pay to actually get pharmacies to participate. So access is, I think, an important issue, an economic issue. Last, I'm going to talk about discounting and market information. I told you at the beginning that AWP and WAC, these compendia prices, were maximums. Does that work? And I want to take you back to 1968, to the start of the Medicaid and the Medicare program, and I want to take you to a task force. Oops, I didn't do that.
You're back.
Okay. To a task force appointed by LBJ to study prescription drugs. And what did they find? Red Book and Blue Book are compendia. They still exist today. And here we're talking about Red Book and Blue Book prices, and they say they don't reflect the actual manufacturer prices, which are determined by various and sundry discounts. And they don't even reflect the prices that are in current catalogs. They're just benchmark or reference prices, not actual prices. In 1975, when the federal government was thinking about putting MACs in place, what would later they would call the fulls, or something like it they would call the fulls, there was a debate about how state Medicaid agencies should estimate acquisition costs, and should it be actual acquisition costs or an estimate of actual acquisition costs. And so they had a discussion. In the course of that discussion, the secretary of HHS today, but then it would have been Health, Education, and Welfare, said, you know, I don't think you should use average wholesale price as the basis for actual acquisition cost, because it isn't. It's not done by taking surveys of drug companies, and they are not closely related to the drug prices that are out there. In 1980, in the late 70s and through 1980, there was a, that's amazing, there was a study done, we'll get there, I'll just keep talking as though it's up. There was a,
You need to go back one more.
can you go back 2, 3? There were studies done by the government off of invoice prices for pharmacies, and they actually made a guide to prescription drug costs. And in it, they used both Blue Book and Red Book prices, as well as the information they had from invoice prices. And they stated there that the controlling source for their guide was the invoice price level data, because this reflected actual pharmacy invoice prices. Again, invoice not necessarily fully discounted, but what's on the invoice before discounts and rebates may be applied. Instead of those is published in the Red Book and Blue Book. And then a couple more, 1997, here's a textbook saying that AWP and WAC are not transaction prices. I'm gonna run, OIG's giving an estimate here of 42%. And what's my last slide? I'm okay with the last one. The last slide, I wanna circle back to access. Remember, I told you that may be one of the motivations, in fact, that drives Medicaid agencies to pay more than they might otherwise have paid, and in fact might rebut the idea that I could have paid, as a Medicaid agency, an actual manufacturer's sales price or average revenue. Here we see from one state Medicaid agency official saying, look, I know that WAC is theoretically related to the charge for a wholesaler to purchase the drug, but it doesn't have rebates, discounts, promotional bonuses, etc. So recognizing that WAC is not the actual price, and with a recent study having been done that said that the actual acquisition cost in that area was WAC -2, they were putting forward WAC +6. And why did they put forward WAC +6 when the surveys estimated said it was MAC -2? They say, clearly, because they want to cover not only the cost of acquiring the drug, but other costs as well, and to provide sufficient access. It's true, and I'll just say in my last statement, that manufacturers, I suppose, could provide AMP as the AWP, but it would throw the whole system, I think, into a cocked hat. CMS already has the AMP, they already have the ASP, and we can talk about more why they do or don't use it, but I think I'll close because I'm getting signs.